Can I have a motion to enter open session, please? Mrs. Manuelito, second by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 4-0. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. As you can see, to my left, the seat is empty. Mr. Tomeo is ill tonight, so we wish you all the best, James, and a speedy recovery. I know you're watching riveted at home, so.
No question.
Okay, Dr. Bassett, I'm going to hand it to you for your superintendent report, please.
Thank you, and I would like to start with an apology for the delay in our start tonight. The board prides itself on making sure it starts promptly for the community, and it is my fault that I talk too much, so my apologies for that. On the superintendent's report tonight, I wanted to give the board and community just a little update on the school resource officer program, and then I need to talk about the calendar for just a moment. School resource officer program in Suffolk County has been in place since 1998 and has been something celebrated as a very successful collaboration between Suffolk County School District and the Suffolk County Police Department. One of the things that was part of the Suffolk Superintendent's 5-point blueprint for school safety that was published following the tragic events at Parkland was the primary and first point was a call for the expansion of the school resource officer program. In the weeks that followed Parkland, Governor Cuomo actually came out and called for a uniformed police officer to be placed in every public school facility. And while we supported his recommendation, we also quickly learned that A, there are not enough police officers in the state of New York to make that happen, nor the financial resources in place to move in that direction. Nonetheless, Suffolk County responded and did expand the school resource officer program in recent months, and we were blessed to have a new officer assigned to our district in November. His name is Officer Tom Wolf. He has been a visible presence in our district regularly since he was appointed to serve us. He has forged relationships with the administration, the faculty, staff, and he's beginning to do so with our students. He has been a welcome addition. He has helped us through some difficult circumstances that have occurred recently where we needed to involve law enforcement due to some unfortunate decisions made by our student body. And he's really been a real resource to the administration and the community. One of the reasons why I bring it up is I do want the community to get accustomed to seeing a Suffolk County Police Department presence on our school grounds. I don't want people to think there is an emergent situation taking place anytime they see a car, particularly his. We have asked regular patrol officers to use our campus whenever they would like to park their vehicles. Often we see vehicles parked by the ambulance or fire department to file paperwork, to write up tickets, things like that police officers need to do. We've invited them to do that while parked in our facilities. They've taken advantage of that invitation. We have invited them when they have the time to familiarize themselves with our facilities to just come in. Our principals have been great about helping police officers to tour our buildings and such. So if there is ever an emergency of any kind for them to respond to, they have greater familiarity with our school campuses. And the police department have been great partners to us. Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, an article that began in an online magazine called ProPublica was picked up by the New York Times Magazine and published there, and pretty reported widespread about an issue that took place within the Huntington School District. And the Huntington Board of Education meeting this past Monday was attended by 500 residents, and they had extensive conversation about the school resource officer program. And it really was the first time in a very long time where questions were raised about the program. There were members of the community who, because of the way the article was written, had a belief that the school resource officer, whose name is Drew Fiorello, and who we had worked with very closely in the past, acted inappropriately and shared information improperly with some other government agencies. Now, I don't know the specifics of the matter in Huntington, but I do know Officer Fiorello to be a man of great character, who was a great resource to us and someone we really appreciated working with. And I have a sense that if school officials were permitted to release confidential information about what happens with students, it might tell a different story than the one that was read in the Times Magazine. So I have had the privilege to speak publicly and in Newsday yesterday about the continued value, stress, and priority we place on the relationship with our police officers, the school resource officer program, and in support of Officer Fiorello specifically. And I was very pleased to hear from my colleague in Huntington that the largest majority of the 500 people that attended the Huntington board meeting did the same. Because this is really the first time that the value of the program has been questioned in 20 years. I have a meeting on Monday with the Commissioner of the Suffolk County Police Department, Commissioner Hart, and Chief Stu Cameron, to talk about the one thing that we did learn from the experience in Huntington and the publication of the magazine, in that we need to better define the roles and responsibilities in writing for all to see of a school resource officer and publish that document. The police department and the districts are in agreement that that's something that should be done. It was the first bullet point in the 5-point safety bullet under expand the school resource officer program. Bullet 1, define roles and responsibilities. So now we know there's some urgency to doing that, and the meeting to start that ball rolling will be taking place on Monday at police headquarters in Yaphank. I feel very privileged to be at the table with some outstanding individuals, and we will do our best to try to alleviate concerns that may exist in some communities about the role of the officers. But that's what's happening in Elwood, that's what's happening across the county, and any members of the board have any questions?
The rules and procedures, I had read the letter that the principal from Huntington had sent out to the community, and he was talking about defining specific rules and procedures within his school and his district. But my understanding is that it would be consistent, it would be coming out of Suffolk County, and then applicable across the board. Am I correct in that?
You are, Mrs. Weiss. When we work on the document, we want it to be something that's uniformly implemented throughout Suffolk County. And please keep in mind, not every district in the county participates in the school resource officer program. There are some police jurisdiction, villages and towns, particularities that the Suffolk County Police Department doesn't serve, Southampton Town Police, things like that. So it would be unique to the 48 districts serviced by the Suffolk County Police Department. And not every one of the 48 districts may elect to participate in the school resource officer program. As you know, it's completely voluntary. Elwood has elected to participate and has been appreciative of the placement of a school resource officer in our district, but it's completely at our discretion, and it continues to be. So one of the things that we think will help communities to decide whether or not this is a program they want to participate in is a clearly defined set of roles and responsibilities.
Excellent, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
No, I'd like to thank you, though, for your leadership in speaking with the press and advocating for the program. We talk a lot about security. Having a police officer know our buildings, know our kids is invaluable. So I appreciate you coming out publicly and advocating for the program, because I think we're all behind it.
We continue in support.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes, you know, an unfortunate incident can throw a roadblock in a whole great idea that's working well because of the way it's reported. So it's unfortunate, but I think we're going to be successful in keeping it in place
Thank you, Mrs.
with your guidance.
Thank you. And I will say that Newsday only put two things that I said in the paper yesterday, but I think they got one of the most important things that I was glad to articulate, in that the main reason why the school resource officers are placed on facilities is to maintain the safety, health, and welfare of our students, faculty, and staff. That above all else. What caused the question and concerns to be raised in Huntington was the belief that students' immigration status was being questioned. And I don't believe that a student's citizenship or immigration status in any way poses a safety, health, or welfare concern to anyone. It was a 1982 decision of the U.S. Supreme Court that indicated a student need not be a citizen of the United States, or their immigration status needs to be legal in order for them to attend public schools. That's nearly 4 years ago. But here we are in 2019 debating that very point. So I don't believe that a child's immigration status in any way raises a safety issue within a school environment. So defining the roles and the responsibilities to say, this is why the officer is here, I think can help put some people's minds at ease.
I agree with you. Having a document that people can look at and say this is why they're here, I think will help tremendously. I mean, we discussed this when we talked about residency issues last year, and said specifically over and over after that law conference that, of course, their immigration status has absolutely no bearing on any of the proceedings that happen. So, again, I think it's fixable.
And it can also protect the officer's reputation for, against false presumptions that may be made.
Into the calendar.
Yes. The other item from my discussion this evening focuses on just a discussion of the proposed calendar that we drafted for the 1920 school year. This is not on the agenda for board action tonight. But assuming we can come to a consensus this evening, we will place it on the agenda for approval on January the 24th. That way we can distribute it widely and people can begin making their travel plans for the next school year. This calendar was a bit less challenging to put together than some we've had in the past for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the New York State Education Department, as you may recall from the 18-19 school year, extended the school year by a number of days. This year they extended it by 3 days. The reason why State Ed took this action was to give districts flexibility in two aspects. One was there are many districts who have taken action to be more diverse in the recognition of holidays that are placed on the calendar. So the state, in recognition of that, wanted to give districts additional flexibility to do that. So they extended the day by 3 days. In the 1920 school year, the state identifies what the last mandated day of school will be, and it's a full week longer than it has been prior to this year, 2 days longer than our current school year. It goes all the way to Friday, June 26th. Sorry, kids. But because of that additional flexibility, and the other reason, by the way, is that in recent years, districts have struggled to meet the 180-day requirement after snow emergency closings. So it also gives districts additional flexibility in having to make up for time that might be lost due to inclement weather. So given those parameters, that put us a leg up on planning. Then, when we more closely examined the calendar and began plugging in those holidays that we did want to recognize, two of them land on the weekend. Both the Diwali holiday and the Eid celebration land on the weekend next year, so we did not have to place them on the calendar, which made it even easier to plug in instructional, conference, and vacation days. So all of that said, and Passover and Easter overlap, so pretty much the calendar gods smiled upon us, and this is the draft that we have presented to the board for consideration. Just to refresh the board's memory, a portion of our calendar is based upon New York State Education Department regulations, Commissioner's regulations. We take into consideration, obviously, the region's testing calendar, the 3 to 8 assessments, and those things. And another governing body is the collective bargaining agreements we have with the professionals that serve our district. So to reflect all of those things, we have planned 184 days, which is the contractual limit that we can plan. Of those 184 days, we currently have 2 days scheduled as superintendent's conference days, one immediately following Labor Day, and the students will return to us on September the 4th, and the other aligned with Election Day, which, as you know, we feel obligated to do because our school buildings are used as polling places, which we feel presents a bit of a security challenge. So when we know it's going to be a well-attended election day, we would prefer to be closed. And as the board has also addressed during legislative priorities, we would like to always be closed when elections are being held, and we prefer not to be a polling place. But for at least election day, we will have conferences so that we can better secure our facilities. So we're 182 plus 2 proposed for the 1920 school year, and you notice that where we had some discretion, we used it. So I know the board has had a chance to review the calendar. Are there any questions?
When we have in excess snow days, and we had sent out something earlier, are we going to go into the April break? Is that what you had decided?
In that little box,
On the box?
in the bottom right corner,
Okay.
it talks about if we use in excess
All right.
of
See that.
4 snow emergencies, where the days would chip away, and yes, you would see them click off the April
Okay,
break.
none of those overlap Passover or Easter on those days, right?
It would be the non-religious aspect of the spring break.
So graduation's the 26th.
Yeah, so we also had to make a decision both this year and next, with the last day of school being kind of odd, when to hold our graduation ceremony. But we did some surveying of interested parties of what they felt would be best. And for this year, the last day of school is Wednesday, but we kept our graduation ceremony on Friday evening. And we would do the same for next year, so graduation would take place on June 26th.
Which is the last day of school.
Which is the last day. A little cleaner next year. This year, last day of school is a Wednesday. In conversations with students, parents, we didn't think a Wednesday was conducive to an appropriate celebration, so we're holding off till Friday.
Any other questions?
Any questions?
No?
Okay, so I just want to be clear at the attention of the board. Hearing no other questions, I will ask the district clerk to place the calendar on the January 24th agenda for board approval. Okay,
Agreed.
thank you.
Mhm. Do you have any comments on the budget calendar, or is that just?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Ms. Dunkel has also prepared a very thorough budget calendar to give the board and community, if acceptable to the board, a sense of the steps we will follow this year that will result in a budget finalized well in time for publication prior to our annual vote. It begins with our first workshop, an overview of both this process and what our initial glance of the budget will look like at the very next board meeting on January 24th. I believe the board has had a chance to review this for a few days. Were there any questions?
Questions? No?
No,
Looks like a plan.
we're following a very similar pattern
Mhm.
that we've used in the last few years. We just gave Ms. Dunkel a few extra weeks to really get her hands around the budget. For those in attendance, this is our new assistant superintendent for business, Ms. Lorraine Dunkel, who has been working with us since when were you started? What? Since November 5th. But this is the first opportunity she's had to join us at a public meeting of the Board of Education, so welcome, Ms. Dunkel.
Welcome.
So Ms. Dunkel will take us through this process and our initial view of the budget at the business meeting on the 24th.
Okey-doke.
So we're good?
Sounds good. We are up to first resident remarks. Are we going to have any? All right, I won't read it then. Okay, so if it's okay with the board, if the board agrees, I'm going to do the consent agenda
Please.
first. Can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda? Mrs. Weiss, second by Mrs. Mamalito. Questions or comments? All in favor? 4-0.
If I just make comments on one of the actions, or two of the actions that the board just took, we are sadly accepting the resignation of Ms. Keisha Folks, who serves as the assistant to Dr. Hull in the curriculum office. We wish her well in her new opportunities, but as a result of that vacancy, we happily appreciate the board's acceptance of the appointment of Ms. Virginia Rouse, who will be moving from the John Glenn High School main office to come over and serve as the assistant to our assistant superintendent for curriculum. So we congratulate Mrs. Rouse, who may or may not be watching from home, on her new position in district office. You're welcome to the DO family.
Excellent, yes. So, we are up to...
Motion to adjourn. So the original intention of tonight's workshop, and I appreciate the board's flexibility in our shift to the business meeting to take care of those personnel items, was to really take a good look at some of the progress, or a good deal of positive progress taking place at the elementary level. We have the members of our curriculum team here tonight, our directors, our assistant superintendent, and one of our two building principals, Dr. Toscano, here tonight. Mrs. Milan sends regret. Unfortunately, she had a death in the family, and tonight is the one and only opportunity to pay Shiva call. So we excused her from the presentation that she was very much involved in preparing. So thank you, Alyssa, for your assistance in preparing the presentation, and our condolences on your loss. But the team is here tonight to take the board and community through some wonderful progress being shown in the areas of literacy and mathematics. And to lead us through that conversation, I would like to call upon Dr. Hull and the team.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you about our program at the elementary buildings. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to the team here, Dr. Scano, Mrs. Fine, Mrs. Kelly Gorman, and Mrs. Milan. Appreciate all of their efforts in assembling our data and preparing for our conversation. So this evening, our goal is to touch base on the following items. I am pushing the up button. Jean, can you push? There we go. Thank you. We're going to begin taking a look at the results of the grades 3 through 5 ELA and math assessments. Then we're going to look at some other data that provides us with a summary of student performance. And then we're really going to also talk about the multiple measures that we use when we are analyzing student performance. And then we're going to talk about some of the things we do relative to helping our students move to the next level of performance and achievement, and also the importance and the role of professional development in how we use data from our student performance to inform our work with our faculty. So the first thing I'd just like to mention as we look at the New York State assessments is that we are in a period of transition. The next generation standards for ELA and math were adopted in September 2017, and they're at the very initial stages of being rolled out into the schools. Right now we're at a time called awareness building, and as part of this, the state has transitioned to a 2-day test, and there will be a 2-day test for the next few years based on the Common Core standards, and then in September 2020 will be the full implementation of the next gen standards, and then spring 2021 will be a brand new assessment. So now we're looking at the results of the 2-year test, the 2-day test, given for the first time last year, and so as a result of that, the state has asked that these results be looked at just in a 1 year and not do multiple year comparison because the prior test was 3 years. So here we have a breakdown looking at level 1, which is below proficient, level 2, partially proficient, level 3, proficient, level 4, the state refers to as excelling. If anyone would like to visit the school report card, I've put the link up at the top, and that is where we retrieve the data from. And on that website, there's an option to view the percentage of students who scored level 3 and 4, and also level 2, 3, 4, as students partially proficient are on their way towards proficient. So the state gives you both of those options as you're pulling down the data, and we wanted to provide that. We also wanted to indicate the percentage of students that are tested, because this is where we start to have difficulties with how to interpret this data. So as we're looking at it, and as we go, we're not going to move yet, Mr. Tranchino, but on the next slide you'll see the percentage of students tested is different between math and ELA. So not only do we not know, well, we can look at the list, but as we're looking at this data, we're not able to say who opted out. Are these students who struggle? Are these students who excel? So it's very hard to draw reliable conclusions from the data. There are still things we can glean as we look through the assessment questions and the things that the state provides, but the state has now asked schools, and actually requires, that as you're identifying students for AIS, you need to use multiple measures. And each school needs to establish what are the tools they're going to use so that they can identify who's in need of assistance, which we certainly do. So on the next page, we have our math results. Okay. Again, providing each of the 4 levels of performance, looking again at who are level 3 and 4, the percentage, and then the percentage of level 2 through 4 partially proficient through excelling. As I said, the percentage of students tested is slightly different. In each case, on both slides, to provide some type of comparison, we're looking at the county data, and in every instance, we are outperforming the county as we would expect in terms of as we're moving up towards 3 and 4. The next thing I wanted to provide you with is just an overview a little bit of our enrollment, because some of these assessments, students may require additional years to achieve or additional support to achieve. So this enrollment data is looking at the end of last school year, because a lot of what we're looking at is last year's data, and it's just giving a sense of the percentage of students who are students with disabilities and the percentage of students who are in our English as a New Language program. Just to have an idea of students where perhaps there are additional resources in place to assist them with meeting standards. So since the 3 through 8 testing is not providing the data that it used to provide, we are absolutely using multiple measures with that, and this just gives us a sense of what we're doing. In reading, we rely very heavily on benchmarking. Benchmarking is administered one-to-one with each individual student. And in our system, we've been using 2 methods right now. We've been using Fontes and Pinnell at the Harley Avenue School. And when we were beginning the process of going into Teachers College, and we were beginning the benchmarking, which is an important part of measuring the effectiveness of the program, there were already some Fontes and Pinnell kits in the building in the 2nd edition. So it made sense to continue with those because of the investment had already been made, and it was a matter of bringing all of the faculty into training and starting to use it across the board. Now, at the same time that we were going on board with Teachers College at Boyd, they did not have any of the Fontes and Pinnell kits. And the Teachers College was offering a benchmarking assessment for free. So that also, at the time, I wasn't here at the time, but that made sense in terms of the ability of the resources. And also, it was, Heinemann Publishers had made it clear that they were building a 3rd edition of the Fontes and Pinnell, so it also wouldn't have made sense to purchase more of the 2nd edition because we knew a 3rd edition would be coming out. So about 1.5 years ago, we discussed the importance of having a singular tool, K5, for this type of reporting. Having 2 independent tools has worked very well in terms of correctly identifying students at their performance level, who's at risk, who needs additional help, who's ready for acceleration. So those tools work very well in how they're being used. But for the purposes of having a big overview of the district and seeing how students do as they move through the grade levels, I think it's going to really help us to have a singular tool. And this is the first year we're using it across the buildings. Our teachers have been having training, and next year's data will be a K5. We also have an end-of-year math summative that we give every year, K5. This was developed locally, and it was really the kind of ideal assessment in terms of how closely aligned it is to the actual curriculum. And it reflects the topics the students are learning in class. Some of the questions were pulled from math modules and other published programs that offer reliable and valid questions that have been tested. And it was developed in conjunction with our administrators and teachers, grade by grade. So it is a little different for each grade, but it is very reflective and closely aligned to the instruction students receive. So the data we get from it really gives some good information. And then there's other assessments that we use as part of our multiple measures. Every math unit ends with a math module assessment. All of that data is collected. And then we have other tools that we use, perhaps if you have children at the elementary level, they're shared with you, their fluency assessment, the math kindergarten readiness, STAR diagnostic. So there's quite a bit of data that's pulled for us to be able to see how students are progressing. So in summary, and looking at the data, our multiple measures serve multiple purposes. One is the requirement for universal screening, where we are assessing every child 3 times a year as part of the response to intervention program to make sure we're accurately identifying students for services, for AIS, and to also just know what should be the next step in the classroom. And then our benchmarking assessment tool, the Fontes and Pinnell, just to let you know why we went with that 3rd edition. It's a very widely used program. It's been around for a number of years. Fontes and Pinnell and Heinemann Fontes and Pinnell themselves have conducted research in many schools using the tool. It's considered to have a great deal of reliability. What it doesn't have is that it's not normed. So we can't go into a system and pull up what is the average score in each school. And so that we have some comparison data the way we did for the New York State's assessments. That's the one thing we don't get from it. But it does really go right down to sub-skills so that teachers and interventionists can really focus in on what they should be doing in the classroom and what they should be doing in small group work. And that tool is so helpful in something like Oscar, where our groups change. And that's our reading special program at Harley. So the groups get to change within every 10 weeks because we have fresh data all the time about how students are doing. And that kind of fluidity is such an important part of AIS, and it doesn't exist in a lot of systems. But because we use this tool and we have a refresh of data all the time, we're really able to switch the groups and move children exactly to what they need next. And then I explained about our end-of-year assessment. So in our many conversations about data, one of the things that Mrs. Fine had actually looked up for us was we know that the elementary test scores have always had, there's always been questions with the ELA and math across the state. And she was studying what happens as the children reach high school. So when we have these scores that they don't look like the kind of scores we get from Regents exams and AP scores. What happens as those children reach high school? So we did take a look at the current seniors. And back in 2011, when they were in 4th grade, we saw that their passing rate on that ELA, which was a year that they really changed the cut points. You might remember there was a lot of publicity. Why did the scores drop so much across the state? That was 69% passing. Those students last year had a 92% passing rate on the Regents. And in math, they had a 77% in 4th grade, and by the time they took their algebra Regents in 8th and 9th grade, depending on their tracking, they were at 92%. So we also try to think about how to interpret these scores at the elementary level and have them make sense as they progress through, because that's what we want them to be successful at the high school level.
Excuse me. So, and that's the same group?
That's the same group of
Same
children.
sample size? You're not getting any different of that?
Right.
So everybody has
They may have moved in, moved out. Yeah.
Bit different, right?
Somebody could have moved.
Somebody can move, someone can come in.
No, I realize that, but for the most part, it's pretty much, everybody has to take the English, everybody has to take the algebra.
And the opt-out was not really a thing.
Yes, that's what I'm asking, okay.
That's right, it was right before that really
Yeah,
started.
that really took.
Yeah. So asking Dr. Toscana to take us through the scores, which Mrs. Swan and Dr. Toscana prepared for, and then I've asked our directors to also talk to us about our professional development and some other aspects of the program. So Dr. Toscana, I think I stole a lot of your thunder on the next slide, so just go down to the bottom.
No worries. Good evening, everybody. So we're going to skip this next slide because you did such a wonderful job. However, I do want to let you know the importance of the reading benchmark. The reading benchmark is given on a one-to-one. So the teacher is working one-to-one with each student. Not only learning their fluency, learning their comprehension, they're learning their miscues, they're learning ways to inform their instruction to improve student learning. So the test is very informative and very individualistic, so very differentiated for everybody. This year now we've decided we're going to be presenting K through 5 data, that it would be more appropriate if we had the same assessment system. So this year we are all using third edition. But just know that this year will only be 1 year of K through 5, so it really will take us 2 years to have some longitudinal data using that assessment. So let's take you through some of the data, and then you have to flip for me, okay? I think you're all familiar with this type of data. You received this before, so you can follow the cohorts. And if you look, Harley began in 2013. And if you look at their kindergarten, you can see the blue that goes all the way through. in our first couple of years. Look at that tremendous success. Keep going through each time, you'll see growth. And if you go through Boyd. Can you flick it? The other way. Again, we didn't start the same year that Harley started. Harley started before us. So we were using the modules before them. So we didn't really start until 2015, 2016. So we have 3 years of data. We are now in our 3rd year of our program. And if you can follow each cohort, you will see that progressively students have grown. We're very happy. We have not lost any year's worth of growth. We've only increased. Can you go to the sample data? So here is an example of just a classroom sample data. We keep this for every single classroom in our building. It is something that is done in the primary school once a month because they change reading levels so quickly. In Boyd, it is done every 8 to 10 weeks. But then we also meet as a group. So we have our instructional support team meetings, and we also have our AIS team, where we will go through every single student and see their growth. So the students that were at risk, who are in an RTI program, if they haven't shown enough growth, our question is why? What can we do now to improve that? So we'll either intensify their program or find a different program during intervention. If we see a child excelling and doing really well, RTI is we want them back in their classroom. So we've helped them enough, we put them back in their classroom and we make them a watch. But this allows us to have that fluid group and to see the communication real time with the teachers and the AIS teachers. After looking at our data last year, and I'm very lucky that the principal of Harley and I are very close professionally and personally, we really take this seriously. We spent a lot of time over the summer looking at the numbers and mining through the numbers and the data and trying to find ways that we could improve the program even more. And through that, we both decided that we needed to extend our reading workshop. That being the mini lesson and the small group lessons that are done during the one block sometimes take away that independent reading time from the students who need it most. So we have both added on more time for independent reading. Harley uses it for Oscar, so those students who are in intervention receive their intervention while the others are given their time to read. In Boyd, those 40 minutes are spent between read aloud, which is research-based and probably one of the most effective ways to improve comprehension, and also independent reading. We have made sure that every AIS student is receiving 2 to 5 times a week of the RTI model, and we do follow the research-based LLI program. K and 1 now are doing the Teachers College new phonics unit of study. It just came out last year. She was able to pilot a little bit, and now it's being implemented. We also continue to purchase books for all of our classrooms, to go through our libraries, to vet them, to see, do we have enough levels at each classroom? Do we have enough genres? Because the goal is the more they read, the better they read. That was just one more. So you do have a handout that you can take from this. Mm-hmm. This is just for you to know and also for the public to know that we may have a 3rd grader who probably could read a T-level book. We would never suggest that, because what's happening in a T-level book is definitely situations that are higher than a 3rd grader should be reading about. So at that point, we do keep them in their same level, a grade level, but do some richer work. So we could actually move kids way, way beyond grade level, but we don't because it's inappropriate for them in subject matter. So we just want you to be aware of that.
Do you test them at the higher level, so they might have a T? They might have a T on their evaluation, but we don't provide T-level books because of maturity?
In 3rd grade, in 3rd grade, I wouldn't be doing that.
Above
No.
the P. Okay.
No, 3rd grade at the end of 3rd grade is a P. So we may go to a Q or R.
Okay.
Or an S.
Okay, so
but like, but I was saying, like this, in 2nd grade, you don't go past a P.
Okay.
Just for maturity reasons. But we just wanted to make you aware of that. So the handout is there to explain.
Yeah, board members, Mary Lou placed a handout with this description in front of your place under the hard copy of the presentation if you want to reference that.
So, an example of a child who is in second grade and has reached the highest level, right? You're an example of enriching work to continue that child to grow in reading would be what fluency, would be different interpretation exercises. and
Usually if
such.
they're reading at a level T, the
It's
fluency
different.
is not an issue at all. It's more, we're going to work more on the comprehension,
Right. So
right?
you go
And going more in depth into what
Okay,
characters
so
or
you
a
choose
setting
different genres
is.
of book that are maybe more factual
Exactly.
and research-based or something? So you just don't want to see stagnant.
I assure you there is no
No.
stagnation at all.
Okay.
And happy.
Hello. If I just may add to that, if we're thinking about a second grade reader, the work, very often our students can decode books, they can read it, so they sound like they're reading,
Yes.
right? But when you consider some of even the higher level chapter books, you're looking at the plot being developed across multiple characters as opposed to one character. You're looking at multiple problems, you're looking at mood and setting. So that level of comprehension becomes much more complex, and it's really important to the true understanding of the text, right? A lot more inferent, a lot more underlying messages. So we do work a full grade level above, but you don't want to go beyond that because too much rich comprehension work can take place. And sometimes if you go too fast, students don't actually develop those skills that they need. So we're really cognizant of that. You're welcome. Okay, so if you recall at a previous workshop, we talked a little bit about, during our Regents work, how we use data, and beyond our day-to-day use of the information for informing instruction, planning groups, determining what materials we're going to use in any given lesson, we utilize the information on much broader scope. And that helps to inform our curriculum initiatives. It serves to help us identify our goals for professional development, and it also helps us determine how we're going to use the budget most effectively to purchase the materials and supplies that are really going to give the students what they need and help us achieve our goals. So just as we do at the high school, we also follow the same process at the elementary levels. And this year, we have two major enhancements to our curriculum at Harley, as Dr. Toscano mentioned. We are implementing the Teachers College Phonics program in K and 1 with the intention to expand it to grade 2 in the coming year as it's being developed. This is a program that we believe in and it's working well. It's developed hand in hand with the curriculum we're already using. So there's a lot of integration with the phonics program with the units of study that we're already doing in reading and writing. So it's not something separate and isolated, it's integrated. Additionally, Dr. Toscano also mentioned our initiative at Boyd this year is that strategy of interactive read aloud. So those are two major curriculum enhancements that we are supporting through our work with professional development. And as always, we are continuing our partnership with Teachers College, and we have a consultant who provides professional development in-house. At Harley, part of that professional development is supporting teachers with the phonics program, as well as continuing our initiatives in the one-to-one conferencing with students and informing small group instruction, so that we are enriching, enhancing the program that our students who can read at higher levels, we can push them along, and we could also do interventions with students to move them along the continuum at a better rate than they might have been performing. Okay, at Boyd, a lot of our work with our consultant in-house has been around the Read Aloud workshop, using note-taking strategies during a read aloud and engaging students in the process of problem solving, identifying vocabulary, analyzing text on higher levels than they can do independently. In addition to that, we are all continuing to participate in specialized days at Columbia University for specific reasons. For instance, a teacher might attend a workshop on a new unit of study that we're implementing, or a teacher who might have changed a grade might go to receive additional training that they might have missed when they were not in that grade. And we are also working on specialty populations as well, where our E&L teachers and classroom teachers who support those students may do specific work around that at Columbia. So that's what we call calendar days. In addition to that, we are also been very fortunate at Boyd this year to Dr. Toscano has, I don't know how she did it, but she did it, was able to get Lester Lamanek, who is a renowned author and very well known for his work around read aloud technique, to come and work with the teachers at Boyd this year. And that was an amazing experience. He has written some amazing books that our students are familiar with. Just so to see that author in their classroom and working with their teachers was really incredible. So that was a very positive thing. And if you recall at our Regents presentation, we talked about that idea of academic vocabulary and what we're noticing on that with that data. And at that time, I shared with you over the summer, we invited a consultant, Amy Benjamin, to come into our district, and she does a lot of work around academic vocabulary. And 26 teachers from across the district came over 2 days during the summer to learn more about academic vocabulary. And we also discussed how we try to do vertical alignment. So to further that initiative, we are bringing Amy Benjamin back into district, and starting next week, actually, she's going to be working with all of the teachers at Boyd. So we're concentrating those efforts on a whole building, and every teacher at Boyd will have 2 days of training with Amy. So we're building continuity of strategies. We're using similar language. Our long-term goal with that is to develop consistent strategies and skills across our buildings, and we'll expand that as we see fit, and how, after feedback from teachers and watching how it grows. So that's really exciting. It starts next week. And that's really how we're moving our enhancements. And then, of course, our budget is supporting some of the tools and resources and strategies and manipulatives that come with academic vocabulary, world libraries, as Dr. Toscano mentioned. Back to Dr. Toscano.
Would it be okay if we broke up reading and math and asked reading questions before we started talking about math? Is that okay with you, rather than having to remember what our questions were and going back? And does anyone have any questions regarding what was presented about the reading program at the elementary level? Questions? Okay.
I don't have a question. I just, the one thing, this is a fantastic presentation. The one thing that bothers me that this is out there is that we don't have an apples to apples comparison on some of the data because we're not using the same tool. So I just, next year when we do something else, I just don't want it to come back and, so I'll be really anxious to see this next year when we're using the 3rd edition and it's just fluid, and then we can start moving forward.
And obviously, like you said, we won't have that longitude. We'll have 1 year next year. So then it begins looking at the study. Because the 3rd edition is different than the 2nd edition, I'm sure. So it's not even like we're going to be comparing Harley. Right, it starts over.
The additions become a little more rigorous because what they're fixing each time is comprehension. So in edition 1, you were told after administering the running record to ask some comprehension questions, and they left it up to you. In the 2nd edition, they get offered a few comprehension questions, but still left some leeway. In edition 3, things are much more formalized. So now, there's only 2 books per level in fiction and then 2 books nonfiction. So everyone who's using the system across the country, when you are administering that book, you're asking the same questions. And so the idea is that you're going to have a more reliable score. You also potentially could not move through the levels as quickly because now it's not just about your fluency, it's also about the comprehension. Yeah. So we do expect to see more consistency, but we'll know that if we have a second grader testing at a level P, and then we have a fourth grader testing at a level P, we'll know that they have read the same books and they were asked the same questions. And that's what I think will give us that confidence in what we begin to see from that testing.
Okay, and we just started doing the phonics program this year at Harley, correct?
Yes.
Was that something that we saw, wow, our kids are, you know, not decoding as well as they should, or not, you know, did we identify that as something that we wanted to see further developed? Because I know sometimes there's holes in Teachers College, and we all are invested in the program and we think it's a great program, but they're trying to fill in where they might be. Is that?
And I can see everybody here wants to respond.
Yeah, I do.
You know, phonics is one of those, it's a conversation that happens in every school district.
Right.
Because it's such a critical part of building a student's skills. And the programs are often isolated, and that's what Dr. Scano was referring to. You have to make time to do that. It doesn't always blend with how you're teaching spelling. It doesn't always blend with your reading program. So, you know, Mrs. Milan has had a long association with Teachers College. She had heard that they were working on developing one, because in our district we've had some other phonics programs that have met with,
Yes.
with limited or mixed
mixed
success. So she actually was able to pilot a little of it last year. She was one of the few schools selected, and so now we have the full support this year. Again, one of the, I mean, they have some, I think quite a few schools have purchased it for this first year. There's a lot of tweeting about it that I read. And the students love it because it's so engaging. In fact, tomorrow morning is a Superpowers Assembly related to the phonics program. And there might be a super present.
Super
We'll see.
reader's gonna make an appearance?
It's possible. It's possible. Yes.
Wow.
The guy who's
Does anyone?
the guy who's ripped, the
Yes. Yeah. You know, I know.
guy with the muscle
A
suit.
rumor, yes. And if you see the things with Mabel, and we've enhanced it even further with some, again, if you have a child at Harley, we started a home practice handwriting program that's also reinforcing spelling, and it's using the characters from the phonics program, such as Mabel. But I see that you just want to say something.
The only one thing I wanted to add is those of us who have been in early childhood education for a long time, we know what the research says about integration of phonics that has to be taught within context without. That has always been our struggle as educators, and the research shows that, but not all programs have always fully implemented that. So we were excited when Teachers College has developed this program, because it's the first program that many of us have seen that totally integrates teaching the phonemic awareness and phonics skills in context, out of context, broadly, and it's integrated well with our other literacy work.
That's so good to hear, because it works well with our curriculum, but we get a lot of feedback from parents saying they still have to know the sounds of the letters, and they still have to decode a word when they come across it, and they still have to be able to handwrite, and all these things that we gave feedback on that we were hearing in the community. This kind of just brings it all together, which is great.
Yep, it has a handwriting component, it has spelling.
Right, so hopefully we'll see those results as they come through. One other thing that I wanted to ask about and or have you comment on is, a lot of times we'll see, he's wanting me to hurry up. The percentage of students with disabilities, or percentage of ENL, the ENL population in a grade level, and then look at those grade scores and assume something about that population. When in fact we have many students with disabilities and or are in English language learning program that are reading at grade level and or above grade level. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, and one of the things with our ENL students in particular,
When you hear the term ENL, there's a big difference between a student entering the country for the first time who has no English, they're ENL, and the student who's been in the country for a longer period of time or has a greater command of the English language, they are ENL. There's no distinction when you look at that data E&L's E&L. So
It's all grouped together.
it's all grouped together, and there's other means that we utilize to assess those students. The NYSESLAT being
And what
one
is
of them.
that?
The NYSESLAT is an assessment by New York State that specifically looks at students' proficiency levels. The research shows that
And we have longitudinal data for that.
yes, although that exam has been changed as well. By the state, yes. But the research shows that minimally, it takes a person 7 years to acquire a language. So we have a student entering a school, a 6-year-old entering a school, and then we have data on them and expect them to be on grade level. It's not fair to the child. So we really have to look at all aspects of it. But that same child might have grown to proficiency levels in acquiring English language. So we know that child's on the trajectory to be successful.
Do we have, in most instances, do we know from the country in which they came from if they were on grade level? Where they came from? Do we know that information?
Sometimes we'll get a report card and you can see certain things, but most times, no. That's why we do the screening process when you come in.
In their language?
Yes, there's multiple steps, actually, Mrs. Fine was part of E&L, and we were just working with all of our E&L teachers. We visited every building, we went right to the classrooms together to really look at exactly what happens when a student enters and ensure that we are interviewing them in their preferred language, and that we're getting work samples, which can be in their preferred language, but also in English, if they have any knowledge of it. And we ask the parents for a history as well. So.
And to your point, there's a Long Island Auburn that supports the school districts for working with students, and they have put together some resources for us that helps us analyze transcripts that come from a variety of different countries. So schools from one country to the other, they have different timelines, they have different mandates. So a 6th grade in one country may not be a 6th grade in another country. So there's many, many, many variables that come into play. And it's like a puzzle for us to solve, and that's the work that we do.
I think that would be interesting for us to hear about in another board meeting, the progress that we're seeing with these students over time.
And the shifts in enrollment and population.
Mm-hmm. And just my last question. When you say that you're increasing independent reading time, just for the layperson, if I know that, if I'm imagining a child not reading at their grade level, and you say, here's some time to read.
It's much more structured.
Okay.
It's much more structured.
Okay, so it's not just, here's a book,
No.
take it and read it, and,
I know that you've come to our school and
Yes.
visited some of the classrooms, so you've seen the libraries,
Right.
right? The libraries are leveled,
yes.
so depending on what level, it depends on how many books a child will have in their baggie, which they've already shopped for the appropriate book from the library.
Right.
So they are reading out of their independent level
So they're reading at their
book.
level, but it's them reading on their own.
Yes. Well, they always read independently as part of reading workshop.
Right.
Right. So you do the mini lesson.
Yes.
You may pull some small group, but you send the students back to work on the skills that you had just taught. Because in order for them to learn it, they have to actually do it.
So it's learning something and then sending them back and using that skill that they just learned
That skill or a skill that they've been working on
So
previously.
it's
not just free for all. Go read. Although that's wonderful too.
because sometimes, drop everything and read and all those kinds of things.
It's a structured
It's
learning
more
environment
structured.
where they are in their leveled readers.
Okay, thank you.
And does the teacher go around and observe?
Yes, for about 20 minutes, the teacher will do a read aloud.
Struggling or dilly-dallying.
And then you'll notice our teachers will actually sit next to the students and ask them maybe to read a paragraph aloud to them, to check for their fluency, or ask them comprehension questions, but they're actively moving around the room.
I just have one question. I had another, but I'm going to ask Maureen separately. About the vocabulary, okay? Because, building a comprehensive vocabulary is really important, and we need to start that at a really early age as opposed to, waiting until they get to high school and with all the social media, they're doing less reading, more. How are we giving them adjacent vocabulary lists as they're reading? How are we incorporating them really mastering that vocabulary in a 2-minute, you know.
I don't want to see it because we had a poster in here. There is something known as the academic word lists. So academic vocabulary word lists are the words that appear most frequently. We're not necessarily teaching every single word, but we're using vocabulary. Think about yourself as a parent, and when your child is learning how to speak, the language that they're using are words that you use just by being exposed to them. So, Mrs. Freed, you may be using medical words in your house in some way, shape, or form that are not taking place in my home, right? So, just by listening to conversations that are taking place at the dinner table, our students pick up words. We all know our children pick up words that we don't want them to pick up because they hear them elsewhere, right? They kind of build vocabulary words by exposure, exposure, exposure. So some of this work is just by looking at the words and being aware that these are the words that appear over and over. The word like distribute becomes distributor, right? So in a kindergarten class, rather than say a paper monitor, we might say the paper distributor. So as simple as that, these are ways that vocabulary sticks, and it's multiple exposures. So we're looking not just at, here's a list, practice it, test you on it, memorize it, because we know that doesn't stick. So how can we develop the same words, but they're seeing it in first grade, they're seeing them in second grade, they're seeing them in third grade. A study was done on one, I think it was a biology regions, they looked at the academic word list on one page of the regions, there was 13 academic words.
I think I'm more looking at the enriching the vocabulary and building the vocabulary base in addition to the academic vocabulary. And I noticed with some of my children, I can't remember offhand, that as they came home with a reading passage, there was also a list of vocabulary words, and then looking for words that are, similar to that to do replacement. We're looking at, there was some spelling test where they had to take the spelling word and put it into a sentence or put it into a story, just innately over the course of the time. And I guess that's what I was asking, if that's what it was.
Yeah, so it's multiple things. It's exposure to vocabulary, it's exposure to words that they're going to see in multiple places and encounter. So we do multiple meaning words, for instance. And the Read Aloud initiative is a big part of that as well.
And I just want to add, the instruction that Amy Benjamin brings is really understanding the roots of words and how they're used. And so she doesn't just explain it to the teacher, she has them experience it.
Almost like a Latin experience.
So, yes, and she has them make connections. When you think of this word, what word do you think of? And then she'll say, now, if you were, and she'll talk, for example, for an E&L student, if this is your second year in the country and you hear this word, what are you thinking? And so teachers really started to see how words themselves, if you connect them intentionally, can start to build a much stronger vocabulary.
And that becomes part of classroom instruction.
Yeah. And yes, and that's why we're bringing her in to work with all, we picked a building where students were just getting ready to take on the intense learning that starts to occur at the secondary level, so that we can build intentional strategies that will then carry forward.
You watch the, the spelling bee, and you're amazed at all these kids, right? You're like, how do they know how to spell that word? And it's all because, if you've done the research there, they learn the roots.
Yes.
And so they're looking at, that root is a Greek root, and then this way, and I guess that's what I'm hoping that we're going in that direction.
That is exactly what is at the heart of this training.
Right. So they manipulate words and they connect them and make connections across words.
Yeah, I just don't want to hear, hey, you,
Nope.
Absolutely.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Okay. So let's present our mathematics. So both Harley and Boyd have now created local end-of-the-year summative assessments. It is teacher-created with, of course, our director, using the modules, using some Envision, but all of it is standards-based, which makes me very happy because we're not just following the cookie-cutter program. Who's got the clicker? This is the data for Boyd. The next slide is my favorite. I think it's really important for the public to know how closely we monitor student success and student achievement. If you'll notice, like let's just say this is the third grade classroom coming in. We had their second grade summative. We gave them a placement test. We're using so many multiple measures here. So we have their STARS fall exam. Next week I will have their STARS winter exam. And then we have their MAD minutes all the way through, because that's our goal. One of our goals is fluency. And if you go through, we have our mid modules, our end modules. When we meet with our AIS team and our classroom teachers every 6 weeks, we have such a picture, a wide picture of how these students are doing in every avenue. So it really lets us see what they need and what they don't need. It's not a one snapshot picture. It's a whole picture of student success and student learning. And to think about putting two buildings, doing all of this data together, it's like a perfect little wheel, and I'm just so proud that we're able to do that. And looking at that data, again, Mrs. Milan and I sat and we pondered and we thought and we said, okay, what can we do to raise these? What can we do for our next steps to make things better? We have math AIS teachers, but for the first year now, Harley has a math teacher. They used to have a TA. We have students that are, pulled out based on certain skills, and they're given direct intervention. We review our data monthly and quarterly. We have a math recovery assessment that's implemented for a pilot group of AIS students. Fluency is assessed throughout the year and is part of a summative assessment. And then there are motivational activities. We know that fluency is extremely important for solving multi-step problems, word problems, all of that, but students don't want to memorize their facts. It's not really that exciting. So we have tried to make it exciting. Basically, we have fact fluency boards in our building. We have brackets of students against students. We have fact masters that make themselves on the board. We're doing the same thing at Farley. We're trying to make it as fun, as competitive as possible to put them in the right direction.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here to speak to you tonight about some of our initiatives that we are pursuing in our math instruction and professional development related to mathematics. As Mrs. Fine noted earlier, we regularly go to our data, we analyze how our students are doing. What Dr. Toscano was describing, we use the same math assessments, and even though it's locally derived, we're able to look at performance across classrooms also. So if one teacher can compare based on her class or his class to a whole grade level also. So we are able to see and then, perfect our curriculum better based on that information. One of the initiatives that's come from our reflections is a focus on building students' number sense and mathematical fluency. So we are pursuing this at both Harley and Boyd, and generally number sense and fluency, they kind of refer to a child's ability to use and understand numbers by knowing their relative value, by demonstrating their ability to use them flexibly when adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, be able to interchange operations in order to find an answer. To be able to develop useful and efficient strategies when they're counting, measuring, using estimation skills, things like that. So that's where some of this comes from, and that's the number sense idea. Including in this concepts are things like making a 10. That's something that I have always done. It's something that doesn't necessarily come naturally to students. So if you're adding up a bill or trying to figure out how much you're spending at the store, I always try to look for, friendly numbers or multiples of numbers and things like that. And so those are the kinds of things that we're trying to draw students' awareness to so that they start to then use them and become more efficient mathematicians. One practice that we've begun using in Elwood is called number talks. Number talks engage students in mental math through grappling with interesting math problems. It might be flashing what we call a dot card, or providing students a simple operation problem, and asking the students to mentally compute and then explain how they computed the problem. In the fall, I was able to attend a training at BOCES with our math AIS teachers from both Harley and Boyd, and it was with Sherry Parrish, who is the author of Number Talk. So it was a really incredible experience for us to have her here on Long Island. She is from the South, so they had brought her in, and a lot of different districts were there to be able to experience that firsthand. What we learned there, we began to turnkey Superintendent's Conference Day during grade level meetings with teachers, and so that small group that attended that workshop was now able to share it with the rest of their buildings. Although some teachers had already begun trying out Number Talks at Harley over the past few years, particularly kindergarten has really been using that. Now we are asking the teachers at Harley, because they have had a good amount of experience with it, to implement at least one Number Talk a week. A lot of them are doing at least two. And then at Boyd, we're just introducing it, so teachers are still being trained and just beginning to try it out a little bit. If you'll humor me for a minute, I'm going to give you an example. So this is something that we might do with our kindergarten students. I'm going to, in a moment, yes, no pressure, late kindergarten. In a moment, we're going to show you a dot card, and when you have one way of telling me how many dots, you're going to hold a thumb to your chest. If you, and the rest of our dais here can participate, our audience, if you want. If you then, while we're giving our friends some time to think about their answer, if you come up with a second way to find a total, you can add a finger. Okay? And if you're really accelerated, you can go for 3 ways, but well. So, if you would, Ms. Dr. Hall, push us forward here.
We can need time.
No, you won't. However, if this was a kindergarten class, we might time it. So again, when you know you're going to think quietly, but you put a thumb to your chest. If you come up with another way that you see it, you can add another finger.
We just keep going?
Sure. So I'll stop you. So just for the benefit of conversation, yes, you're just finding the total number of dots. Would somebody like to tell us how many dots they saw and how you saw it?
I saw 2 squares or diamonds, so I know that's 8, and then just added the 2.
Did anyone see something different? All right, hold on.
It's late kindergarten.
It was late.
This is early for me, this is free. I just saw 5 and 5 right away.
Okay. Oh, wow. I didn't see that at all.
Anyone see something different?
I counted by 1.
Early kindergarten.
You had to do that.
I wanted to at least introduce the concept so that someone might.
Yes, they would do.
The line and then the 2 on each side.
So the 6 on the diagonal.
Right, so the patterns of the 4 sets of 2, and then multiply that, and then the other 2 should be 10.
And to be honest, if I was doing this with students, the first thing you say is, how many dots? And you may have 9 come up, and you just, 9. Did anyone get any other answers? Oh, 10, okay. And so then you backtrack through, and you let the students kind of find their own mistakes, and you can go back and say, do you still see 9? And they might say, oh no, and they'll explain why they missed it and how they got it.
This is also an exercise in recognizing patterns,
Yes.
also correct, and then putting a different.
And again, this is kindergarten. It's all about patterns, flexibly, well, it was, we didn't want to make anything too challenging at this late in the evening.
You might be in that 60.
But you might see, in 2nd grade where they're adding two-digit numbers, and so students have to explain. Some of them might say, if it's adding 27 plus 32, that's not a good example, 34. They might say they looked for a 10 and added up, or they may say they made a double and then added on. So there's all different ways that they can explain it, but they're never touching paper and pencil to do it. The teacher, as the recorder, then as they share, can write out so that students can see. But the students are all doing mental math, and it's just to practice getting them thinking about how to efficiently compute numbers in their heads. So that is a number talk. And if you could just, you did it already, you're ahead of me. In addition to number talks, we were fortunate enough to receive an EEE grant for a subscription to Tangy Tuesday. And that's something that Greg Tang, he does a lot of work with elementary math. He's authored books that we use in our classrooms, but it's something where all of Charlie and Boyd teachers once a week get an email. There are 5 math problems, but they're all puzzles or activities, and they're all designed around number sense and fluency. And so the students either can work on them in class, some of the teachers send them home, some do some in class and send it home, so you may have seen it, you may not have, but it is in there. So they have done that, and then they also, with that grant, we were able to purchase flashcards for some of the games that he has. And again, it's all about fluency, getting students to recognize patterns. If you go to, I can just show you quickly. This is one called Kakuma. It's a deck of cards. This one is with addition. So we wrote the instructions. We just teach the kids and then they know. But find the one number that is the sum of the 2 others. So you get the 5 numbers on the right there. And you see it? The answer might be 5. I didn't notice that when I picked it, to be honest. So the student would say that they see that 5 plus 6 or 6 plus 5 equals 11. And so it's a deck of cards. Students can do it independently, or they can do it with a partner or a small group.
And do both of these programs align with the curriculum? And so there's something that, as you go through the weekly, you give a supplement?
So the number talks grow, we have set shared files. We use Google, and we share files so that the teachers all have access, and it grows with the math curriculum. This is more based on students' ability, but it is still grouped. There's cards that are addition and subtraction. There's cards that are multiplication and division. There's cards that start to involve fractions that we have at Boyd. There's ones that compare different units. So they have to compare things like they might see 25% in all different ways, or things like that, or using money. It's some of them are. They're challenging. Sometimes it's units of measure in terms of like grams and kilograms, and it's things that the kids have to think about a little bit.
Tuesdays are more used as a reinforcement or enrichment if somebody's on a level 9
Exactly.
or reinforcement if somebody needs more.
An unexpected benefit to it is that the teachers all get access to every single grade level every week, which I didn't realize when I put in for the grant, but it's wonderful. Because if you have a child that is accelerated, I have teachers that give the child the pack from 5th grade instead of 4th grade. And then if you have a child that's struggling, they can still practice, but maybe they're using the 3rd grade. So that's something that I didn't know we were getting, but we did get. So we love that.
And is that a yearly subscription?
It is, but we're liking it. And the other thing we use at Boyd is a subscription to something we call Reflex Math, and that's for fluency development. It is individualized by students. Students log in at the beginning of the year, and they are assessed either in addition, subtraction, or multiplication, division on their basic facts. It's all animated. There's a little crab and a Jamaican man that talk to you, and it's as students answer more and more math questions correctly, they can earn points that let them go make a little avatar, so they're motivated by that. But what's nice is that it also tracks their progress, and so there's all reporting features. The teachers at Boyd early in the year were trained on how to use the program, how to set up their classes, how to get students using it. Just before the break, the Math AIS teachers and myself at Boyd did a webinar with the people at Reflex, and we learned about some of the reporting features. So now at the end of February, we'll be going in, working with the teachers on, here are some of the reports, here's some of the data, and what we can glean from looking at this data. So that's something that we're looking forward to doing in the next few weeks. And as a shameless plug, before I give the mic back to Dr. Hull, we have STEAM night on Thursday from 4:30 to 7. So if you are free, we're always looking for participants, K through 8. We do ask, we're volunteers. We do ask K through 5 that the students are accompanied by the parents, but we're very excited.
Thank you so much.
Also be accompanied by a parent.
Oh,
Or superintendent.
you don't want that.
Thank you to the curriculum team, our principals, appreciate all of your hard work. And are there questions or discussion?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I have a little thing that kind of caught my eye. I sent you something on it. When you go to the simulation page of the assessments, okay, you're looking at the scoring. Can you go back to that? This one. So I guess wondering is why is it such a broad, why is it like 65 to 84%? That to me seems so broad, and do we break, is that something that the state gives us? And do we have the ability to break it down? To me, if my kid came home and said, oh, I scored some, between 64 to 84%, just what the heck? That tells me nothing. So I just...
So there's a few reasons why we report it out this way. The assessments primarily drive instruction, and they allow us to identify students and group students. So the way we were recording them, we were not breaking up the data in terms of like a summative report as we're doing right now. We were doing it in terms of grouping by classroom. So when we were preparing for this, I think it was back in November, I seem to recall seeing every test out for all the students from last year. And so we were deciding what would be the best way to summarize this. And at that point, we had thought, well, we so often talk about passing and mastery, so that maybe that would be one way to look at it. Because when we're using these tests, we're actually looking at which questions students struggled with and which ones they were, that they were correct with.
Which had shown us
So,
in previous...
yeah, so we divide it that way. We divide the data based on what are the skills that we're targeting. So this was how we had selected it. So when I went to try to be more discreet with it, the only way we had recorded it right now resulted in this. So we can, going forward, as we're recording it, now start to put it into a spreadsheet so that we're able to break it up more discreetly.
When you're doing your analysis, you're actually much more specific, and that's what... Okay. Yeah.
So part of why we chose this, and it's different than the reading. The reading is so given to us in terms of its levels, and they move, so the math is different. So we went with this because it aligns to things that we thought people in the community would be familiar with. The concept of how we looked at Regents data in past presentations. 65 is passing, 85 is mastery, so that's sort of the eye and the lens that we took it from. However, what going to your question, or what I think is the real question, when we're looking at student performance and trying to determine students who, maybe need to receive AIS services or maybe need enrichment, we're looking at their exact scores. We're looking at, what questions they did well on, how did they do, how is their fluency compared to their score on the assessment? Do they align? Are they not aligned? Sometimes you see your highest performing students have a low fluency score because they're that student that doesn't want to make a mistake. And so when it's more of a timed assessment, they hesitate and then they don't always show exactly what they know. And so looking more closely at all of those things to get a better picture of what kids know and how we can best help them, succeed in the future. Right. So this was really, again, just a summary, and that's why we went in that direction.
What would be an example of giving a student math enrichment, since you just mentioned it?
So like I said, something that we'll do is give them the puzzles to a higher level. Things like the number talks have a built-in enrichment component because it allows kids to see and talk about how they're solving math at a higher level. For those students, when we pull, the great thing about having somebody at Harley that can now pull students that need that RTI service is that then the teacher can give students a more challenging problem that are remaining in the classroom also. So it allows us to build in that enrichment for them too. And sometimes it might not be, okay, they've mastered addition and subtraction, that we're going to throw them into multiplication, but it's getting them to really think about how addition and subtraction is used in their everyday life and how they can apply it to real world situations and different ways they may see it, or using it with money instead of just numbers. Those are ways to enrich it, but stay within their grade level standards.
So I guess you don't have to worry about having inappropriate math topics. So you can probably enrich, right, gambling.
Yes.
Percentage on sales. So I guess we can push kids a little bit. Is it normal to have, and these scores are just are end-of-year assessments. They have nothing to do with multiple measure.
They have nothing to do, they're only one snapshot.
They're one of that whole chart. So if the kid had a bad day and they did well all year long, that's not reflective in this whatsoever. Also, this end-of-year assessment is I'm just trying to clarify between reading. We're trying to get something that's more consistent, that we can compare longitudinal data with, or no?
We have. When both Mrs. Kelly Gorman and I attend county meetings, different ones, that question is often posed, what product are you using for math? The problem is the products that are normed do not necessarily match the curriculum. So there's a decision made, for example, like in Terra Nova, or even in STAR Math, or in the Iowa tests. There's going to be questions that students may not have been exposed to content. So they're going to get it wrong, but it might then be like false wrong because the student hasn't learned it yet. The other thing is, when we're assessing kindergarten and first grade, it's problematic to find a tool that will allow students to demonstrate what they know about math that's not taking into account that they're not reading yet.
Right.
So we're still looking, because every program has pros and cons. So and now that we're in this format of developing this other lens, not just the lens of how we use it in the classroom, where I think we've really developed looking at students individually, differentiating instruction, planning for instruction, but now looking at it from another purpose, which is for us to be able to evaluate progress as a whole over time, that we'll continue to think about what would be the best thing to either bring in with what we're doing, or perhaps make a change somewhere. And also we also publish programs on a fairly regular basis, because we've had to do a lot of adjustments to the math modules. They received a lot of publicity about having pros and cons. And the things that work well with the math modules and how they push students to think mathematically is really important, so they're understanding concepts before they're learning algorithms. But there are other issues with the modules that deal with perhaps introducing a topic before a student might be ready for it. And some of them are just written in such a way that we're spending time overcoming the poor design of the unit before we can actually get to the unit. And so there's been a lot of summer curriculum writing. You'll see math comes up probably every summer, because we're tweaking units to get past any problems with the module. So we've looked each year that I've been here at published products, but the problem is they keep putting whatever comes out from the state, Common Core. It takes a math program that looks pretty similar to what it was 8 years ago, but it says Common Core on it now. Now when the Next Gen started to come out, now we're seeing programs that say Next Gen. But when we're really looking at the program, they haven't made that rich change yet into the kinds of things that we're doing when we add that local piece. So
Now, the local piece, is it being used by other districts?
no, it's created.
So it's just
It's created through some.
created
right.
through us?
It's
created.
But it's
Okay.
taking, the backbone of it is the math module. The training we brought in with Larry Farrell last year as a staff developer is about mathematical practices, about the standards. And that's part of our conversation, is that we need to have an authentic, rigorous core that we can apply across the grade level, and then make some adjustments to overcome some of the issues with how the modules were written. But
It's really tough, because we have that, a huge opt-out on our math test. And now we're making up a test that is not proven to be.
Right, what we feel confident about is that it is aligned to the instructional program.
Right.
And that is going to allow us to see how students are mastering the content that they're being taught. But it's not necessarily
Right.
letting us have that peer-to-peer measurement.
Right.
And program-to-program measurement. But again, the principals always approach me about when will we be budgeting for that whole-scale new purchase? When publishers respond with true standards-based math, that is not...
When you find something you like and see it.
Yes, and that where the professional development costs are not prohibitive, because there are some programs that are very interesting, but you basically have to have a math coach, like you do for Teachers College, in order to run it effectively. So we're still looking, and in the interim, we work constantly on the program that we have, and that's a lot of the grade level meetings.
So I just wanted to add the fact that we really do diligence. I mean, we definitely take multiple measures throughout the year, because we want to make sure that we ensure every student's getting what they need. So whether it be a summer that we co-created, which is great, we're still looking at the whole picture, which is really what we need to do for instruction.
Right. And individually, right.
But they're making the time,
Great.
and I come forward and say, if we could purchase.
I was just gonna say that. I wouldn't want you, because I value you and your opinion very much. I wouldn't want you to find a program that needed a PD coach like we did for Teachers College and say, no, automatically we can't afford it. We all appreciate what Teachers College has done, then we could possibly do the same type of program for math. I wouldn't want to rule it out.
Thank you. And when we go to our conferences like Long Island and ASCD, you see all the publishers there. And really, Mrs. Kelly Gorman is more on the forefront of that because they come to the county meetings that you go to.
We can't under the value the mental math and the fluency component taught at the earlier levels. I've seen it with my children, the ones that really were able to get that fluency in their mental, the 1 times 12 and the 12 times 12 and get it like that, really excelled in math. And the ones that struggled and didn't get it really had a more difficult time. So I really think that's a great foundation and hopefully, we'll always continue that.
Yeah, I think there are things in the Common Core math program that have really strengthened students' ability to be mathematicians. And it's more that, how it was rolled out was problematic. Putting it in every grade at the same time without the very intense skill building that was needed was very problematic. But I think teachers would say there are benefits in the types of skills students are being taught. And that's why they're not changing the modules. So they've brought in the next gen, but they're not revising the modules. It's up to schools to make those revisions. But we're an awareness building, so at this stage.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much for this. I mean, not only did you answer all our questions tonight, but throughout the week before the presentation, we had a lot of questions and
Well, I appreciate that because it really helped us to hone in more effectively. So thank you.
all right. I thought it was thorough, it was complete, you answered our questions, and we look forward to hearing the future longitudinal data
Thank
when
you.
that becomes available.
Yes.
And thank you so much for all the time and effort you put into it. Principals, directors, Dr. Hall. Dr. Bassett really wants to stay longer, but we're up to our second resident remarks. Resident, any remarks? Thank you. Okay. Can I have a motion to re-enter executive session for the purpose of discussions related to mid-year evaluation of the superintendent of schools? Mrs. Marcus, second by Mrs. Mamalito. All in favor? 4-0.